Speaking of Taiwan, it's facing the fallout of Liz Truss's visit. She poked the dragon, and so has America. What have the Americans done? They've promised more weapons, among other things.
We're deepening our ties with ASEAN and the Quad, and I'm pleased that the United States will soon provide significant additional security assistance to Taiwan through the Presidential Drawdown Authority that Congress authorized last year.
As expected, China is livid. It has resorted to its usual temper tantrums. Taiwan says it tracked 9 Chinese military aircraft and 5 naval vessels around the island. This was between yesterday and today. And China's Ministry of National Defense issued this statement.
We would also like to make it clear to the DPP authorities and the separatist forces that any attempt to seek independence by soliciting US support and by resorting to force will lead to nowhere. The Chinese People's Liberation Army will continue to strengthen military training and combat readiness, take all necessary measures to smash separatism in any form and external interference, and resolutely safeguard China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
He says China will do everything necessary to smash Taiwanese separatism. What does that mean? Well, so far it has involved conducting live fire drills around the island, especially after every high-profile diplomatic engagement. Like former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit last year, or Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen's visit to America. She met with current House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. After both these incidents, Beijing went berserk. It increased the violations of Taiwanese airspace. It littered the area around Taiwan with live ammunition. And it made a hue and cry at international forums. Like I said, the usual temper tantrums. China is now likely to step up the aggressive posturing again. Not so much due to Liz Truss. Beijing keeps downplaying her visit, also calling it Instagram diplomacy by the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister. We mentioned this a while back. More than Truss, it's US President Joe Biden that has riled China up. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also said this yesterday.
Another force is by making sure that you have a combat-credible capability. And in investing in the things that we know that will provide us the edge in any kind of contest is the right things to do, the right thing to do. And that includes, in some cases, moving things forward in theater, pre-positioning things. And so I think it takes both of those approaches to have a complete deterrent capability.
The key phrase here is deterrent capability. The US is trying to make the cost of invading Taiwan too high for China to consider. Reports say Biden is planning to approve the sale of $500 million worth of arms to Taiwan. This is on top of a $19 billion arms package that was previously approved. Approved but not delivered yet. This package includes Harpoon anti-ship missiles, Javelin and Stinger missiles, HIMARS rocket and missile launchers, and F-16 fighter jets. The US says that the $19 billion delivery will be expedited. Also, 100 US troops are scheduled to go to Taiwan. What for? Biden says they'll evaluate Taiwan's defense training methods. But China does not see it that way. Here's what Beijing has said.
For some time, the United States has been constantly stepping up its military collusion with Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party by strengthening military ties and upgrading substantive relations, which shakes the foundation of China-US relations and undermines peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The US activities are totally wrong and dangerous. The Chinese side is strongly dissatisfied and resolutely opposed, and has lodged solemn representations with the US side.
Beijing says it is prepared to forcefully reunify Taiwan, and the US is vowed to defend Taiwan. These threats and statements have been flying around for a while now. They've turned the region into a powder keg. One wrong move could lead to disaster. Meanwhile, the battle between the US and Russia is intensifying. The CIA has announced a mass recruitment drive. They're looking for Russian spies. And where do they hope to find them? On a Telegram channel. Not making this up. You have to look at this video. It was created by the CIA.
Это та жизнь, о которой я мечтал. Тот путь, который я себе выбрал. Почему жизни одних людей ценятся больше, чем жизни других?
This video shows fictional Russian officials at home and at work. They're struggling over a question. Should they reach out to American spies? That's the question they're debating. There is no mention of Putin or the war in Ukraine. The video ends with a message. The people around you may not want to hear the truth. We do. You aren't powerless. Connect with us securely. In the last frame of the video, there are instructions on how Russians can contact the CIA securely. Guess what the response is? Apparently, some Russians have reached out and Moscow isn't pleased about this. The Kremlin says it's watching what's going on.
I don't know. I haven't seen it. But I'm convinced that our special services are also monitoring this space in the necessary way. Given that, and we all know perfectly well that the CIA and other Western intelligence services are not reducing their activity on the territory of our country.
An open offer to spy for America straight from the CIA. Why just Russia? No country would be happy about this. But then again, this is not your average diplomatic relationship. The United States and Russia are sworn enemies. And espionage has defined this relationship, especially in the Soviet era. So these recruitment efforts are not new, really, though the methods may be. The US has been at it for a while, more so after the war in Ukraine began. They see Russia as a quote-unquote potentially rich recruitment environment. And they have clear targets, like Russian government officials and those Russians who recently fled the country. Do you know how many people we are talking about here? Some 500,000. 5 lakh people. That's how many Russians are said to have fled the country. They left in the wake of the war, and the CIA sees them as a good resource pool. They can talk without the fear of being tracked. Or so the Americans hope. In November, a senior CIA official defined the perfect candidate. Let me quote that for you. We're looking around the world for Russians who are as disgusted with that as we are, because we're open for business. It couldn't have been clearer. What do you think Russia is doing in response? It's going after Americans and branding them as spies. This week, an American was charged in Vladivostok. His name is Robert Shonov. He used to work for a US consulate in Russia. Now he's been detained and charged with espionage. He was detained in Vladivostok and he's been kept in a jail in Moscow. The US embassy in Moscow has not said anything about the arrest yet. This isn't the first such, though. Earlier, a journalist was held. His name is Ivan Gershkovich. He works for the Wall Street Journal. He too has been accused of espionage. And the White House has called these charges ridiculous.
These espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms.
But they should expect more of this. Since the Soviet era, both Washington and Moscow have engaged in the shadow war. Espionage is critical to their operations, a way to gain leverage. Let me in fact tell you about the most famous incident of this kind, the Great Seal bug. This was some 60 years back. American officials appeared before the UN Security Council. They presented proof of Soviet spying. And what was this proof? The Americans had found a bug, a device that listened into their conversations. It captured conversations and transmitted sound waves to an external receiver. Do you know where the bug was found? Inside a gift. A gift given by the Soviets to the Americans. The bug was plated inside a wooden carving. This was hung at the ambassador's home, inside his home office for several years. No one knows for sure how much information was compromised. But it's believed that the Soviets got access to a great deal of privileged information. They used to keep a car outside the ambassador's home just to listen to what was being discussed inside. The same thing is happening now, only this time the weapon is far more sophisticated. Since we're on the topic of war, let's look at what India has been up to on that front. It's ramping up its defense capabilities, focusing on conventional weapons like the Brahmos and Pralay missiles. A few days ago, India successfully test-fired a Brahmos supersonic missile, the first such launch from INS Mormugao. It's a guided missile destroyer. Also the Pralay missile. 120 such missiles were ordered last December. Another 250 will be bought soon by the Indian Defense Ministry. These weapons are used for non-nuclear warfare. India is arming itself considering the border tensions with China and, of course, the perpetual challenges vis-a-vis Pakistan. Unfortunately, both are nuclear-armed nations. So to avoid a nuclear escalation, India needs to be ready to fight a prolonged war with conventional weapons. Our next report tells you more.
The Indian Defence Forces are upgrading their arsenal, their missile arsenal to be specific. India recently test-fired the medium-range Brahmos missile. The Brahmos isn't new, of course, but this test marked the first time it was fired from a guided missile destroyer. The Brahmos missile was launched from the INS Mormugao. The Indian Navy said that the missile successfully hit the bullseye. Brahmos is a portmanteau of the words Brahmaputra and Moskva, rivers in India and Russia respectively. That's to signify that the missiles are jointly developed by the two countries. But India is not resting on its laurels. It's not just relying on the Brahmos missile series. It's also stepping up the production of its Pralay ballistic missiles. Pralay means apocalypse. These are shorter-range conventional missiles. Conventional means they aren't made to carry nuclear weapons. India already has the Prithvi and Agni series for that. The Pralay missiles have a different purpose. They can be used in a conventional war without leading to an escalation. You see, India's most likely adversaries are China and Pakistan. Both of them are nuclear powers. Even if there's a war, none of the countries can really use their nukes. That would be mad. And we don't just mean that it's preposterous. In military terms, MAD stands for Mutually Assured Destruction. Basically, that's where everyone dies. No one will fight a war that way. But that doesn't mean India's neighbors won't try and invade. China tried that in 2020 in India's Ladakh region. There still hasn't been a disengagement there. And as for Pakistan, it has done everything from sponsoring terror to declaring war. So it's a smart idea for India to be prepared. That's where the conventional weapons like the Brahmos and the Pralay missiles come in. They'll help India defend itself without having to resort to nukes. India's Defence Research and Development Organization, or DRDO, recently finished testing the Pralay missiles. Like we mentioned earlier, they're short-range missiles. They have a range between 150 to 500 kilometers. The Pralay missiles are surface-to-surface missiles, meaning they're launched from the ground. The Pralay missiles will complement India's Brahmos stockpile and give the country an added military dimension. The Indian Ministry of Defence cleared an order for 120 of them last December. Reports say that an additional order for 250 Pralay missiles is in the works. And who will get them? A whole new division. India is planning to set up an integrated rocket force. The IRF will handle India's Pralay and Brahmos missiles. It will also take care of other conventional missiles and India's rocket launch systems. The rocket force won't be in charge of nuclear weapons though. Those will still fall under India's Strategic Forces Command. Nonetheless, India's integrated rocket force will have control over its conventional missile assets, and it will coordinate with other branches of the Indian military. This helps streamline India's defense and plan for a swift response in the face of aggressive neighbors.
Imagine a world where artificial intelligence governs our decisions, autonomous weapons walk among us, and devastating cyber attacks are launched regularly. Today, all of this sounds dystopian, but the truth is, without proper regulation of AI, this could be our reality, sooner rather than later. AI is part of our daily life. Its great potential has accelerated its acceptance rate. But along with that, it's also increased its dangers. The CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, agrees with this. He's the person responsible for ChatGPT. He testified in front of the US Congress. He told him about the threat it poses, the threat that AI poses. And if he sees the damage coming, what about the rest of the world? Do governments see it? Where are the guardrails? Who is working to regulate AI? Here's a report.
In the past few years, a number of tech luminaries have appeared before the US Congress. And they've all received a dressing down from lawmakers. This includes Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. Because Congress is often upset with tech companies, it's forced to play catch-up with these giants and clean up their collateral damage. Now, a new contender has entered the ring. His name is Samuel or Sam Altman. He's the CEO of OpenAI, the parent company of ChatGPT, the AI chatbot that has practically exploded since its arrival. Now, Altman has become an evangelist for the next generation of AI. So obviously he was invited to Capitol Hill. Another dressing down was expected. What wasn't expected was his agreement with Congress. He spoke about the immense potential of AI, but also the harm it could bring. Altman implored the lawmakers to regulate it. Listen in.
My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening.
AI is a transformative technology. No one is blind to how it benefits society. So tech giants have been pouring billions into it, including the likes of Google, Microsoft, and Meta. But they've been doing so amid rising concerns of how harmful this tech could be, practically ignoring its role in killing jobs, spreading misinformation, and even becoming as intelligent as humans. This is scary, and the speed at which AI is becoming a part of our lives is even scarier.
Artificial intelligence has the potential to improve nearly every aspect of our lives, but also that it creates serious risks we have to work together to manage.
And that isn't a shocker. Urgent management is needed. But is anyone doing it? There are obviously fears of history repeating itself. Remember when social media took the world by storm? It transformed the world. But the regulations came much later. They're still not up to the mark, and we continue to deal with the repercussions. Governments across the world clearly failed to meet the moment on social media. Is that how they plan to deal with AI as well? The answer is unclear. Some countries are trying, like India. It's now considering a regulatory framework for AI. Meanwhile, the US has been trying for some time now, but their track record is grim. Dozens of privacy, speech, and safety bills have failed in the country. However, other countries are speeding up their regulatory process. The European Union is set to introduce rules later this year, and China has already created laws, but their regulation is limited to compliance with the country's strict censorship laws. So, different countries are dealing with this differently, but their efforts are not enough. AI is flourishing in a perfect storm of unreliability, irresponsibility, vast usage, and a clear lack of regulations. And we can't run from the reality any longer. The fourth industrial revolution is here. So we can either harness the power of AI or become bystanders as it pushes us to a dystopian future.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Pakistan. The ongoing political turmoil took a comical turn. Former Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry made a sprint for his life to evade arrest. In Japan, coral reefs off the island of Okinawa were seen releasing thousands of tiny eggs into the ocean. And in case you had a bad day, we have a video of a panda playing in a bathtub, which would give you a dopamine hit. And finally, what makes the 17th of May significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day, West Germany ratified the Treaty of Warsaw. The year was 1972. The treaty was signed between Germany and Poland. Both sides accepted the existing border that was imposed on Germany in 1945 after the end of the Second World War. Then German Chancellor Willy Brandt had to face heavy criticism for this. Critics said the treaty was a betrayal of national interest. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.